Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Edric Show. I am your host, Edric Jerome. This is the place for intelligent conversation with interesting people. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and you'll get notified when I post content each and every week. I've been looking forward to having this conversation. I want to welcome my guest, award-winning writer, playwright, and civil rights attorney, Gloria J. Browne-Marshall. She's here to discuss her new book, A Protest History of the United States. She is a professor of constitutional law and Africana studies at John Jay College in New York. And in 2024, she was awarded the prestigious Silver Gavel Award by the American Bar Association. In addition, she's also an Emmy Award-winning writer and host of the animated series Your Democracy. Professor, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
No, this is such a timely book. So I just want to get right into it. So, as I mentioned, the timing of this book is so important. And given the current extreme political environment, and in my opinion, the outright dismantling of sacrosanct bedrock civil liberties, what inspired you to write this book now? And were there particular incidents or events that motivated you to write this book?
Well, one, I didn't write it in January. It took years of research and writing, and the Beacon editorial team was just excellent, Beacon Press. But I started working on this book and this is my seventh book, as a kind of legal argument. That's how it started. It was
Sure.
supposed to be legally based on why protest was still important. And there was a protester, a community organizer in Brooklyn, an older woman I didn't even know, who died penniless. She didn't have enough money for a coffin. And when I found out about this, and at the same time, I'm hearing these people say, oh, protest doesn't matter. That's old fashioned. That went out with the civil rights movement. It just made me go, okay, I need to make the argument for why protest is still important, why it's still effective, and to make people expand their minds as to the different ways in which protest works and different ways in which people can protest. And so that's how the book came to be. And then it was suggested to me that I should add memoir to it so that it would be more like storytelling and not your cut and dry history book. So it's interdisciplinary with interviews with different protesters, as well as going from the indigenous people protesting against the incursion of the Europeans 500 years ago up into climate change. Protests against police involved civilian assaults, as well as the type of, I guess it would be called regentrification that's taking place in so many different communities. But not just that, the idea that Black and Brown communities have been used as the groundwork for highways and new parks and other developments without taking into account the cultural history. And even the cemeteries, they are located in these places. And so whether or not it's the women's movement, anti-war protests, slave uprisings, as well as protests around labor and creating unions, all of these things are protests. And so I really wanted to expand what protests meant, show the long history of protest, and empower people to be involved because protest is very American.
And there's a personal story for you, and I guess you have roots with activism through your ancestors, starting with your great great grandmother, Eliza Bradshaw. How did incorporating this personal and familiar history shape the narrative and perspective of your broader view of protests?
Well, as an academic, I'm a tenured full professor at John Jay College, and you're supposed to have this like wall
Right.
between the topic that you're writing about and yourself. And I decided, not just on my own, but I was persuaded to break down that wall and actually show protest in my own life and in my family's history. I'm the only person who's actually protested out in the streets, which began in third grade. But I wanted to show how people following their dreams can be protests. And so having my great great grandmother enslaved as a child and then lived through slavery, and then as an exoduster, a proud exoduster, that first great wave of Black migration in the 1870s into Kansas, her husband dies as soon as she gets there. like within the first year. So survival is protest. You think about holding on to one's dreams is an act of protest. So when you start thinking beyond what the narrow version of people believe is protest, which is very important, and I give all of the attention and props to people who are protesting in the streets because it's a dangerous thing to do, and at any time in history, but also know people who have helped pay for the buses for the protesters to get to the protests are also part of the protest movement. So we have to think of the many ways in which people protested, and I try to use different examples from my family history as to what would constitute protesting. My The grandchildren of Eliza, William Bradshaw, went to law school, if you can imagine, in the early 1900s, and then worked on civil rights cases that were the groundwork that led to Brown versus Board of Education. He didn't live to see Brown versus Board of Education, but that was part of protest for him to say, we're going to move forward as a lawyer through bringing these legal cases. So my family intertwining into the history of protest was very important. It's still kind of uncomfortable for me to break that wall down, but it's something I think that makes my book more accessible and readable to the public. And that's what I think is so important, to actually have them be empowered by reading the book.
Now, I'm here, and this is a long question. I preface this by saying it's a long question. I'm
Uh-huh.
here in Northern California, and I'm currently rereading Delilah Beasley's seminal book, The Negro Trailblazers in California, which she chronicles Black people in California from the 1500s up through the early 1900s.
Wow.
It's an amazing book. If you haven't read it, I strongly encourage you to read it because it relates to exactly what you're talking about. I'm struck by how effective there was a California State Convention of Colored Citizens in the 1800s, and they were able to achieve meaningful civil rights and lasting civil rights, like the repeal of the testimony exclusion law in 1863. But there weren't a lot of Black people here at the time. So my question to you is, how effective or how important is communication and strategy in protests as it relates to volume of people? Because recently we've seen millions of people in the street. We've seen these types of movements before, but they're not always effective. You can have a lot of people, but talk to me about strategy and communication in protest that really makes that change.
But that's another reason why I'm so glad to be on your show. And these are such great questions,
Thank you.
because we don't talk about strategy and protest. We act as if people over these many generations went out into the streets. They went out three times, and the fourth time everything changed. And somebody on the other side just assumed they knew what the people wanted. So what's missing, I think, with what's happening right now is that this is an organic thing. A protest is organic. It grows. And usually, take for example, the George Floyd protests. Something horrific happens, or something happens that causes people as a trigger to be so outraged they want to go out in the street. They want to vocalize. They say, now's the time to make this change. Then that could be a small number, it could be a large number. But George Floyd, it started off just in that community. And then it grew from that community into the city, to the state, then nationally, then internationally. Not all protests do that. But then people take the energy from the rage and they say, now we've got to use it as fuel for change. What is it that we want to change? In the situation of George Floyd, they wanted to change policing policies. They wanted to change the way that the city or local government actually distributed funds. They wanted to make sure that certain police holds on people, like putting their knee on the neck, was no longer going to be used. There was the passage of the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act in federal legislation. So there are many ways in which they've changed. They also put more pressure on prosecutors to prosecute police officers. That was across the board. They started looking at the role the medical examiners played and started. So all of these things came from the rage that was an initial fuel, and then the tactics become, we've got to be on the street. The signs that we have will not just be signs for the other protesters, it's going to be the information for people who are watching the protests to take back with them.
Mm.
How are you persuading the outside people to do things differently, to vote differently, to be the pressure, the point that we need that's outside of where the protester can go? So you need the message to be expanded well beyond that. And propaganda, whether or not it's propaganda that's anti-protester or it's the propaganda of the protester trying to get the message out. So when I'm using propaganda, I'm using from the standpoint of messaging.
Sure.
What type of messaging is the protester trying to get out? And if you could have a million people, like one of the major examples is the anti-Vietnam War protests. You had millions of people, but you also had a message. Initially, it was just in the war. Then it was like enough of a message that it caused the president not to run for re-election. It was enough of a message that the age to vote was 21 was reduced to 18 in the changing of the Constitution, which is very difficult to change. So that meant that people outside of that protest got the message, internalized it, and from their place in the world decided to use their power to be a part of the change as well. All of that has to take place. It can take place as it was with the Vietnam War protests, which were some of the largest protests in history of the country at that time. But could also take place when people know what we want them to do. Martin Luther King was brilliant with this. He was not only somebody who had the fire for the protests, but he was somebody who could and would um, know how to use the press
Hmm.
and be a part of the press. It's certainly a problem at this point. But with this particular protest, the protests that are going on right now, if I could apply it to that,
Absolutely.
it took time for people to come out of their silos, and they still are. Because of the pandemic and because of social media, people were in their living rooms. So the initial protests we're seeing right now are protests around rage and outrage, but also protests of community coming together that had been isolated for some time, for years. And so we are taking some time organically to grow that I'm seeing of the protests. So when I'm analyzing where protests are now, they're beginning to come together. They're starting to be protests where people are just getting to know each other again, to be out in the street, to feel that sense of community again. And the signs are more for each other that they're holding up than for the outside world to go out and do something. So, but I think soon you'll begin to see strategies and tactics because it has to be known that, as I said, Martin Luther King knew how to use the messaging. He knew how to use strategies. And there are many within the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, and even prior to that, the labor movement, that understood the use of tactics and strategies, that you had more than one thing going on at the same time. Right now, we have people, many of whom are novices when it comes to protest. And
Right.
that's why they actually believe all you need to do is go out in the street and carry a sign and come back home. And that's supposed to make the change without realizing that for generations, people had strategies and tactics that were being used. That's how we got the benefits of protest today. And it might be the movie version of protest where you don't see the actual behind the scenes strategizing people around a table. One of the iconic photographs of Martin Luther King is him at a table of advisors where people are debating, bringing in different information about what's going on around the country. All of that is a part of protest as well. And I think that that wasn't assumed to have happened. I think we actually are not respecting not just the creativity, but the intellect
Right.
of the people who led protests prior to our generation.
Exactly. And that's a great segue into my next question because you've mentioned generations a couple of times. And my question is, um, what have been some of the generational friction, if any, particularly among our community, when it comes to organizing and protest? So, for example, you talked about Martin Luther King, the nonviolent strategy that he employed. Um, do you think young folks today are going to be able to take that mantle I mean, I don't know if nonviolent strategies still work today, but the point I'm trying to make is the strategy has to change by generation. So going forward, what do you think are some of the generational changes that protesters may need to employ? Because the old way may not be effective today.
Well, here's what I found. Remember, my book, A Protest History of the
Mm-hmm.
United States, goes over hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
This is my seventh book, and most of my books are over hundreds of years. It's not a survey. And
Right.
for those people who are, historians who go, oh, if you go over 100 years, it's a survey. No, it's not a survey. You need to read the book. It's an analysis.
Exactly.
Because if you see the combination of approaches, you'll see that even though for example, selective buying or withholding of funds or withholding of resources. Chief Powhatan did that to the English when they invaded his territory in the 1600s. It's like initially it's like we're going to be friendly, we're going to have negotiations, we're going to try, but if you stay, we're going to have issues, and one of the issues that you're going to rely on our resources, and we're going to withhold our resources, we're going to withhold your access to our resource, so you can't get to our resources. That's not generational. That is a tactic that is very effective. And to this day, whether or not it's people deciding not to buy at Target or buy it or not to buy at Amazon or wherever the place may be, I like to use the phrase from that great philosopher Nina Simone, who said, you should learn to leave the table when love is no longer being served.
Mm.
So if you're going to a business and they're not respecting you, don't give them your money. I mean, that could be someone could say, oh, that was from the boycotts, from bus boycotts, from the Montgomery bus boycott. But it's very important that you see it as a strategy today. Don't throw things out because they were from another generation. Figure out how you can use them successfully in your generation. The boycott, people think of the boycott of the college students at the counters in Woolworth and other places, sitting at those counters and the sit-ins. The sit-in is something that's still effective. People have not been using it at all today. So they don't know how effective a strategy can be. They just know that it was used back then, so it couldn't be effective today. Have you tried it? Think about there's a sit-in at the grocery store, for example, as opposed to the lunch counter, the sit-in in different places, and make it strategic. I would say the another part that is a strategy that people aren't thinking about, even though we're online and we're able to send out information online, back in the day, they would hand out pamphlets. So you would know what they were protesting about. I had the opportunity in Dallas, and I was speaking there, and there were two women who were Trump supporters, and they called themselves conservative Christians. And they said, we don't understand what you're protesting about. Now, when I've said that to protesters, they're like, how dare they? They know what we're protesting about. It's like, so where is it written what you're protesting about? Where is the information? How would they go read it? So, and then you look at the signs, and the signs could be very pithy. The signs can be very funny, but are the signs actually telling people who are not at the protest what your issues are?
Mm-hmm.
So, until we have something that's the 21st century social media version of the pamphlet that you're handing out, there should be a website that says these are our protest issues. These are our issues of concern. And people should know where they can find that. And so this assumption that 20th century or even 19th century tactics don't work, I don't think people are working them using 21st century tools. Because if they did, and reading my book, A Protest History of the United States, thinking with a 21st century mind how to use these effective 20th and 19th century tools, I think you will find they're not so much outdated as they haven't been used. That's the best that they could be used given social media, TikTok, or whatever way you want to use a vehicle, whether or not the vehicle was a pamphlet. And I still believe when we have protests, there should be a piece of paper that's printed on it what the arguments are, so that people who are watching the protest can be handed this, take it home, read it, study it in the privacy of their own home, and then they become your ambassadors for your message, as opposed to the protest happened between this time and that time. People go home and they think that's enough. That's not what the effective strategists did in prior protest eras, and that's missing now. So I think there's a lot that's missing that we can do differently to use these past strategies. And even though it won't be the same, all of the same ways, but let's not throw these things out before we've even tested them.
You mentioned, having something to hand to people, and I think for me, one of the most effective platforms that people had to hand out were the Black Panthers and the 10-point platform. It was there, exactly. In my opinion, many of those same things that they were advocating for are currently in a lot of the Democratic Party platform. I mean, they were way ahead of their time in terms of access to healthcare and feeding kids and all of the stuff that they were doing. But to your point, you knew exactly what they were there for and exactly what they were protesting for. And I think that's a really good point, especially in this era of social media when everything is instant. You literally can communicate to people on an instant basis. But, maybe talk to me a little bit about that. Talk to me about social media because I've seen some of the protests. I saw some of the ones down in LA when ICE was there and the National Guard came in. And it's everybody's different, but I saw some folks protesting, but they were taking selfies and look at me, I'm next to the tank, or it was like, okay, I get it, I think, but talk to me about that aspect of social media, and maybe there's some things that aren't necessarily cogent to what we're trying to do in terms of protests.
I mean, people have always had different motivations for being a part of a protest. I mean, what we're seeing, the regime, and that's what it is because, Donald Trump has decided to call himself a dictator and act in some of the most disgusting ways possible. I mean, it's really beneath anyone in any particular situation of power, but in particular, this one, in which, AIs spewing excrement on protests. I mean, it's just disgusting. And so when you're looking at this, and then on the other side, um, you have people protesting in balloon outfits. People are
Right.
protesting, showing, basically saying, "I'm not the horrible person you say I am."
Right.
So you're going to see that I'm not this horrible person and that you're actually the horrible person. But it's expecting people to do a whole lot of critical thinking, because if they just see somebody in a balloon outfit, they might not do all the connections that these people want them to do. So
Right.
that's why I said you have to be to the point. What are the issues of concern? That's in that messaging, for example, I can't breathe. To the point messaging, okay, during the George Floyd protests, during the civil rights protests in Memphis, I am a man. The placard that they wore. We've got to figure out how to do this messaging. We have to, as you pointed out with the Black Panthers, with others, and the anti-war protests as well. They had a list of plans. These are the points we're making. This is what needs to happen. Even if it's the president must go, which is what one of the points was made back in the time period of the Vietnam War. You know, and they actually had the president pushed out of office, that he did not run for a second term because of the war, because of the protests that then affected his polling and everything else. I think it's necessary for us to see the arc of time is longer than the weekend, longer than the time period of this fun part with the selfie. As I said, I think that part is about regaining community. And there are people, unfortunately, at this point, and I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, there are people who don't have a background, a deep background at all in protest. So they don't really know what to do. They know that you're supposed to have a sign, that you're supposed to go to the street. Here's the time you're supposed to be there. But protest is also supposed to disrupt.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's understood. Yes, core part of protest is to disrupt. One of the core parts, messaging. The other is to disrupt. That means that people are not supposed to be comfortable in their oppression. That's where the disruption comes in. That's why the bus boycott in Montgomery, it disrupted the economy of Montgomery, and it forced them to hear the message of the protester. If people continue to protest in front of City Hall on a Sunday when nobody's there, there's no disruption.
Right.
So that's when, going back to your earlier question, that's when the number of people then become very important. If you have 20,000 people protesting in front of City Hall on a Sunday, that's a big deal. But to have people just protest on a Sunday when you're not disrupting business, so I think that the strategy then gets lost. The last point is protesting has always had with it a level of danger because the status quo will say, how dare you say you're unhappy? How dare you not take what we give you? Now, whether or not it's women trying to gain the right to vote, they were arrested. They went on a hunger strike, another form of protest. They were force fed while they were in jail. And this is order to gain the right to vote. We take for granted what people had to do in order to have the rights that we wake up with every day. The 8-hour workday. We didn't have the 8-hour workday. The employer could set the time. It could be 10, 15, 20 hours. And if you didn't work that time, you were fired.
Yep.
And there was a time, if you didn't work the way they wanted you to work, there was called peonage. There was a connection between your job contract and jail. So if you didn't work, and there were legal cases that if you didn't work, you could be put in jail. So there was so much that people had to protest, and we wake up today assuming we always had an 8-hour workday or 40-hour work a week, that we always had these different types of protections for us on our jobs. We get on an elevator thinking that it's always had a weight limit. Like, no, it didn't. There's always been an exit sign next to the exit door. No, all of that came from protest. So I just look at this going, whether or not the message is that you want this president to step down, you want a regime change, or you want to not just a regime change, but change altogether with this regime. You want Congress to do his job, whatever it is, the message has to be there. If people don't want to listen, disruption has to be there. And then it goes to whether or not violent or nonviolent disruption is what people are going to do.
If you indulge me, I want to ask, since I have your time, and I want to take advantage of your expertise and your opinion on this, because out of the recent protest and No Kings protest, there's this narrative from some of the opinion makers and thought leaders that, well, I didn't see a lot of African Americans at this protest. Do you have any thoughts on that, or maybe just your opinion on, you know, why people are saying that, or they're just maybe what's your take on that? With that narrative is starting to get out there that weren't no black folks at this No Kings thing.
That's been the case from the very beginning of this administration, because there are many people, especially Black women, and whether or not they're called the 92% or what it might be, but there are Black women who are saying, we gave you a candidate who was a viable candidate, very well educated, skilled, and you chose America, too many people in America, to vote this man back into office when you knew that he was a brute. You knew what he was capable of doing, even though some people are finding he's going well beyond even what they thought he was going to do. Um, and so they're like, you caused this, these people in America, whether or not you're the farmer now who's griping about the effect of tariffs, you wanted this, whether or not you're the Latino who voted for this man for whatever reason, you wanted this person. And so there are people of African descent in particular who are saying, you deal with him.
Hmm.
You go out there and protest. Why are we going to protest to try to have a better government when you chose to have this man as president of the United States? And now you're bemoaning or you're having buyer's remorse. So many white women voted for this man. And those people, who decided that whatever the smaller number of people of African descent, and too many people who are naturalized citizens who have family members who are undocumented, voted for Donald Trump. And I became aware of this, and I couldn't really understand it. It's like, I know of a daughter who voted for him, and her mother is undocumented. And now she's at the immigration attorney trying to get her mother from being deported. So there are a lot of Black women and other people who are saying, if we go out there, Donald Trump's, I don't know, they some of them act like thugs, but his people who are following him, whether or not they're in uniform or out of uniform, will feel they have free reign to
Yep.
hurt African
Mm-hmm.
Americans.
Mm-hmm.
So they're saying this is what I've heard, and I've been in many parts of the country in my book tour. Why should we go out there and put ourselves in this level of danger when you're the ones who decided you wanted this person and now you have buyer's remorse? Now, I will say that many of the people, most of the people that I've seen at protests are not the ones who voted for him.
Hmm.
Um, but I also have said to people of African descent, issues are on the table. And if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. So as these protests continue, one, we need to have our issues on the table. Two, I've talked to and seen too many people, and I've been at protests. I've been protesting since I was in the third grade. So I'm an academic, but I'm also an activist. So I've been in the streets. I was at the No Kings protest in Little Rock, Arkansas. Once again, I would start the chant, and then they would chant, I would continue. And when I stopped, they stopped. And I thought, oh my God, there's no depth of knowledge as to even how to be at a protest. So when you were talking about people taking selfies, the people thinking this is a party, the people not thinking about disruption, the people coming to City Hall when it's closed. I mean, all of these things are coming from a thin base of knowledge about what protests are about. Black women have over 250 years of protest history. African Americans in general have a long history of protest, knowledge, institutional knowledge. That institutional knowledge is not being put out there voluntarily, but I'll tell you the other side, and this is very important. It's not being requested. And I know this for a fact from my standpoint. I've had no one reach out to me to ask me about my institutional knowledge. And I have a book and an activist background, and I don't know other people. So these people actually believe they already know everything. They already know how to do everything. And what they're doing as far as their protest goes is based on their sense of what a protest is. I don't think we can be as effective if we don't work together. We need the institutional knowledge that African Americans have, but not just the institutional knowledge, the success rate that we have. We would not be on this show today with our educational backgrounds, with the ability for us to navigate this society, but for our deep root in protest, one way or another. Whether or not that protest is by Black excellence, or that protest is to give or not give our money, to create organizations, join organizations. There's so many different ways in which we know how to do this. We're not being called to be a part of it. And that at some point, sometimes it comes across as arrogance. Other is that maybe they don't know. I'm not sure, but we cannot be in these silos. This regime has a certain penchant of hatred for African Americans because of our progress, because it was a Black woman who stood toe to toe with Donald Trump on that world stage, because of Barack Obama's 2 terms in office. I do believe the only reason why Donald Trump wants this Nobel Prize is because Barack Obama has one.
That's clear.
You know,
That's clear.
yes. So that's why I'm saying we cannot afford these silos, whether or not it's self-isolation or the failure of these other protest groups to actually call us to be a part of the strategy sessions. We cannot afford to have, on the other hand, the Black elite who may not have the fire to fight. They might have not gotten into these positions of authority and power by having the fire. They were more conciliatory and gained their access through great education, word of mouth, in the room at the time, whatever it may be. But if they don't have the fire to fight, if they don't have the sense of strategy needed for this, then they should then embrace other activists who do, and share that stage. Because at this point, I don't see enough talk. I see a lot of emails talking about social media. I see emails coming down and emails asking for money and emails saying what they're doing, but it's like there's no human contact. And that's
Are you being
necessary, especially in
bombarded
the
by
Black
text
community.
messages too? I'm getting a tons of
Yes,
text messages too.
yes. And it's like, where are the people? Where's the meeting? And I'm going to say this to you. What's the plan?
Right.
Okay, what is the plan? And I've been saying this for months. What's the plan? And if you have one, are you just going to share it on high in Mount Olympus of these Black organizations that are coming together? Are you not going to tell the rest of the people what the plan is, or do you not have a plan? So I can see how these silos get us picked off. Harvard, with its more money than any university on the planet, cannot have more resources than the federal government of this country.
Hmm.
It cannot. But as thick as the walls are, you can't have that amount of pressure pounding on them. They need to connect with other universities and come up with a plan of action together. It's unity that defeats divide and conquer. It's unity that has gotten us this far. And we have to become unified, and we can't become unified if everybody thinks they know everything and they're in their silos and they just want to protect their turf, and which is what happened too many times during other movements. So we have to find the commonality of what our cause is. Some people, if I might say, some
Sure.
people might be in the Gaza movement. Other people might be in the anti-deportation movement. Some people are in just the Trump needs to leave office movement. There are different movements, anti-DEI movement. And that's one of the things. When I'm seeing these, majority white protests, you don't see diversity, equity, inclusion issue in there at all. So we are not going to see our issues. We're not going to see, what's happening with HBCUs in these other protests unless we are there.
Right.
The protest sign that I use is "We will not be erased." They are erasing our history out of the African American Museum, all of these different things. So the erasure of Black contributions, the erasure of Black history, and talking about we only talk about what did Trump say? Why do you only focus on the bad side of
Right.
slavery?
Right.
So,
As if.
so that's why isn't that something? So that's why it's like saying, why do you only focus on the bad side of 9/11?
Right. Right.
So when you're not in the room to make sure your issues are being part of the protest, then that's going to undermine our ability to have our voices heard.
Well, Professor, on that note, I think we'll leave it there. I want to thank you so much for your book, your life's work. If people want more information about you or your previous books, and are you still on the book tour? And if they want more information about that, where can they go and get that information?
Yes, I'm still on the book tour. I'm going to be touring until mid-December, and then starting in the new year, which will be the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which is a protest document. I will
Absolutely.
be speaking in places around the country with the theme of 250 years of protest. And they can find me on Instagram, on Facebook. They can also find me on my website, and that is Browne-Marshall23.com.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Are you going to be in the Bay Area by any chance? Are you?
I'm trying to be. I was
Okay.
in LA earlier, but if I
Okay.
have an invitation, please let me know, because
All
I'm
right.
I'm trying to get around the country, and I'll be back to the Bay Area. I was in LA, but the Bay Area would be a wonderful place to have this continued conversation.
It's a worthy conversation, and you are a worthy person. And thank you for leading that. And I just appreciate you taking the time to talk with me on the Edric Show. I really appreciate your time, and thank you.
Thank you, sir.
This
Power
has
to the
been an
people.
absolutely. This has been another edition of the Edric Show. As promised, intelligent conversation with interesting people. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Ring that notification bell. You'll get notified when I post content each and every week. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you on the next episode.